Okay, in Photoshop, we're going to navigate to your book files, wherever you have those, and we're going to open the 13 Start PSD. So in Chapter 13, we want the Start PSD. There's a lot of other things in here. And what we see is a file that they've already made for us. If we look over at our layers panel, we see that there's a file or a layer group called button art that is spun shut at the moment. We have body text, logo, and layers. And just so you know, they put in these gray areas just to show us where we should draw or place certain things. It's not that that has anything to do with making frames. It's just kind of a visual guide for us to understand what we're going to be doing. Also, notice all the guides they've pulled out from the rulers, either on the right or the left, to ensure that they had the spacing that they wanted or the grid system that they wanted. You guys worked with the grid system in Design Fundamentals or talked about them a little bit? I get a yes and a no.
We talked about designing
Designing within a grid?
we talked about using it to like layout
Yeah.
and stuff just a little bit.
So that's kind of what you're seeing here. We can turn on different grids, grid views in Photoshop. Actually, do you guys have all these lines showing, correct? Command semicolon is a shortcut that turns those on and off. So if you want a view of your page without all those grids, it's command semicolon. Command quotation mark will show you this version of a grid, which might also help you. This is a pixel grid, so if you're attempting to do some things, but notice there is no exact middle point. Each grid has 4 squares and it goes over an extra one over here, so it's not like the halfway point is perfectly on this line. But sometimes having that like graph paper is helpful, and you can turn that view on as well. So command quotation mark turns that off. So go back to where you can see just your guides, and then let's do a file save as, and we're going to call this file. Also, I've noticed that when you save to the cloud, it's a PSDC, and then one student told me she was having problems doing something with that or getting it back. So maybe saving locally for the sake of uploading it to Blackboard when you're doing your work. Save it to the cloud all the time.
You
But
can actually save it to your computer and then navigate to your cloud.
yeah, you can do that way too. Yep. So if you do see that PSDC, that's what's going on. It's the cloud version. So save to wherever you want to save. Because this is a practice, I'm just going to my computer right now. And we're going to name this your name and then mockup. Saving as a Photoshop file with layers, so say OK. And that's what we want. View your document, fit the screen, so Command 0. Placeholders with the frame tool. So this is a new tool that we're going to be using. So whenever you're laying out things for print, web, or a mobile project, quite often you don't really know what the photos are going to be, or your client will say, I'm going to have 4 navigation buttons and I'll get you pictures for those, but there's going to be 4. So it's hard to work on a layout when you don't have the photos necessarily, but you can with the frames. You can mock it up, move it around, space it out how you want it, and then when they do give you the actual pictures, it's easy to just drop them in. We're going to be creating frames with the frame tool. They can contain an imported graphic, a smart object, or a pixel layer. And when we make a frame, it appears over in our layers panel because it is actually a layer. One thing we want to do with our rulers is we want to change the measurements of them, and we can go into preferences and set it up there, but a faster way is just to go up into your ruler and right click, and that shows you the measurement that you're dealing with. And we want to switch to pixels because we're doing a web layout, and web, everything is measured in pixels. It's the squares on the computer that light up, it's the squares on the smartphone or the iPad that light up. So switch to measurements in pixels. And then we're also going to open our info panel so we can see that. So in the window drop-down box, just check mark the info panel. And that's right here. And in our info panel, remember that gives us information about whatever we're hovering over or touching at the time. As we move our pointer around, it changes. So everybody have their rulers visible and into pixels? Pardon? Command R is the shortcut to turn your rulers on and off. Otherwise, you can go under View and check them on there. But Command R turns them on, and then make sure they're in pixels. And
Where's info option?
the info box, it's a window, so just go under Windows and then put a check mark next to Info so that it lights up. All right, frames, new tool. We need to go over to our toolbar and we need to find the frames. It should look like a rectangle with an X in it. That's not it. That's just your normal rectangle tool. Pardon?
K is the shortcut. It's under the crop tool.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, mine's not nested under the crop tool. I don't
It's
have
under
anything.
it, not nested.
Pardon?
It's under it. It's the next one down.
The eyedropper?
No, maybe you have to reset essentials.
Yeah.
It's like that.
I was going to say, this is not, my window's not looking the way, oh yeah, I'm in the painting. Ha, good call. Yeah, in your workspace, reset essentials. You know, if it didn't show up here, you obviously could go down to those 3 dots that are at the bottom of the toolbar and activate whatever tools aren't showing. This is funny because when I was working on this at home, this tool was way down at the bottom of my toolbar, so whatever. Okay, there's the frame tool. It looks like a rectangle with an X through it. And the X indicates that it's a placeholder for something else that's coming. The top of this document, we're going to click and drag out to match this big gray box. That's why they drew it in. But if they hadn't, you see all the different rules, those guidelines, those are kind of giving us an idea of where we should drag out. So click and drag out and make a frame that exact same size. I got to go put my windows back on, or my info layer back on. All right. The X indicates that it's a placeholder. So if they didn't give us this document or this layer with all the gray spaces on it, if I turn that off, this might be what you would be looking at starting from fresh. It would be white. It wouldn't necessarily be the checkerboard. But using those guides, you would drag out a box that size. All right. Let's go to our layers panel and make sure that this layer that we just added called frame 1 is the one that's activated. And we're going to place a linked graphic in here. So we're going to go up to File, and then we're going to come down to Placed Linked. So remember the difference between linked and embedded. Embedded, it goes with the file. Linked, it goes out and knows where it is on your computer. We're going to navigate to our Lesson 13 art folder. So twirl that open, and you see we have a bunch of different graphics here. We're going to take North Shore, and then we're going to say Place. It drops the image into that frame, and it automatically sizes it to fit the frame. Now, depending on if this graphic literally is that size, it'd be easy, but maybe it's a little taller. It would decide how much of the above and below is not showing through that window, or how much left and right is not showing. But it tries to scale one of the dimensions to fit and make sure the other dimension can. If you wanted to, you could also drag an image from Bridge and plop it in here. You don't have to necessarily do this file linking. When you drag it that way, it embeds it. If you wanted to make a link to it, you would have to hold down a key to do that while you're dragging and dropping from Bridge. You would hold Option as you're dragging in to make it a linked file. So a regular drag embeds the image. All right, with our frame still selected over here in our layers panel, you see it looks a little bit different. We can see the link showing the image that is linked and put in this window, if you will, this like masked out window. We're going to go down and we're going to take our frame tool again, and we're going to drag out a rectangle below these 4. It doesn't matter what size it is or where it is at all, because we're going to change that. So just click and drag out a rectangle, a frame rather, of any size. And And then with that frame still selected, go over to the right-hand panels where you see your properties, and you see a width and a height and an X and a Y coordinate of that. We're going to change these to be 180 by 180. And if that chain link thing was automatically resizing your second measurement to something you didn't want, remember you would just unlink them and type in the two numbers as you wanted them. In this case, it worked out. And then the X and Y coordinates are like on a graph sheet of paper. So we're going to say 40 by 648. And that puts it at the exact coordinates of that first box. So there's no way you would have known those numbers in the real world. You would have moved it around and dragged it around, but that's exactly how we created a frame or modified a frame. We drew it out at any size, but then we made it be what we wanted it to be. All right, we've made one frame that matches that square size right there. The three that remain are the exact same size, so instead of drawing them all manually, we can simply duplicate them, which works pretty well. So come over to your layers panel where you have frame 1 highlighted, and we can either drag it down to the duplicate layer icon down here, or what's the shortcut to duplicate a layer? Command, guess a letter, J. Command J 3 times. So we have frame 1 copy, frame 1 copy 2. You get the idea. All right, let's go to that first copy, frame 1 copy. We're going to change in the properties panel the X value. Instead of being 40, it's now going to be 300. And notice that pushed it over, so now that frame lives in this second spot right here. We're going to do that with copy 2, and we're going to change the X coordinate of that one to be 550. It's going to move that over a little bit more. And then go to your last copy that you made, select it in the layer panel, go up to your properties, and change that one to be 800 pixels. Or I'm sorry, just 800. It's the X and Y coordinates. Now you can see we have a complete row of placeholders, and they correspond to these layers in our layer panel. Everybody good with that part? Okay. All right, so we've made our layout. We have it looking like this. Ultimately, there's going to be 8 buttons or 8 different galleries, so we're going to add those to that row below there eventually. But this is a nice web page mockup. It's what you would see if you would load a home page. So this is not necessarily something we've talked about in my classes. I don't know if you've talked about it in Mary's, but just some kind of common lingo about web pages is this top area is usually called a header, and that's usually where you find a logo, the name of the company, some other things usually are up there. Sometimes it's a picture, but whatever. You need to identify where you are. Then they have this large image. Then they have a little bit of text kind of telling you, what the site's about. These are going to be the links to different galleries on this art page. And then this bottom part is called a footer, and that's usually on every web page. And that's kind of the information like the copyright, where they're located in the real world physically. Sometimes it's down here, their actual address, contact us, support, kind of minor things that don't go up in the main navigation, which, by the way, is a layer. We just haven't turned it on. It's going to go right here, the navigation system is. So this is kind of what you would expect for a desktop version of a layout, but you don't have all the assets yet from your client. So now they do have the images. So let's select this first square. So it was frame 1. Make sure you've got that one, and you see that the X is blue and the bounding box is around it now. And then we're going to come over to our properties panel. So instead of doing file, place, linked, or whatever, we're going to do it right from the property panel over here. So we talked about its width and height and its X and Y coordinates, but the next section down says inset an image, and it says find on Adobe Stock. Or if we click the down arrow, open your libraries, place it from a local disk embedded, or place it from a local disk linked. Click on that linked option. So this is just a shortcut from going through the menu like we did before. And in our art folder, we're going to choose the image called Beach. And notice that it was put inside that square. The image itself may be that exact size, or it may be a rectangle and much bigger, but it sized it down to fit the one dimension and then left off whatever else isn't necessary. All right, let's go to frame 1 copy, so that's second square. And we're going to insert, so up here, insert from a local, or place from a local disk linked. Click on that again to get it to pop up. And we're going to insert North Shore, which we know is a really long rectangular picture, but it chose to show that piece of it. Go up to your next one, your third image over, and we're going to insert or place linked. And on this one, we're going to choose DeYoung. And then for that last square, select it in your layers panel, place linked, and we're going to choose main 1. Okay, see anything different about this image? What do you see that's off?
Smaller.
Yeah, it doesn't have enough height to fill our window. So you see those gray bars above and below it. So that's something that we'll be dealing with. All right, in the layers panel, select the frame layer thumbnail, the right thumbnail with the link icon, so the actual one of the main one, which should be selected right here. And we're going to drag the image or its corner to help improve the composition. So we can move it around inside of here. So do you see how I'm moving it left or right to change the composition of what we might want? We can also do a Command T for a free transform, and then we can scale it up so that it's big enough, and then reposition it inside that window. So Command T to transform it to make it a little bit taller, and then find, drag it left or right or however you want so that you get the actual, whatever part of that image that you want showing through the window. And then select or hit Enter, Return, or the check mark at the top to select that change. All right. After you plop pictures in here, it's a good idea to look at all of them and make sure that they're actually positioned where you want them to be. So if you went down to the next layer down, the DeYoung frame, and move that around, and you can see, yep, you can see that there's more available top and bottom. So maybe you want to reposition that picture a little bit. It's always a good idea to go back and make sure that the image fits correctly and that you're seeing the part of it that you want to see through the window. Nothing to change there. Nothing to change there, okay? All right, let's do a file save. So we now have these layers, and we're going to use these to create button graphics. So actual graphics that you can give to a web developer that they can plop on a page and then turn into buttons that take you somewhere else. They can code them to jump to another page. So we're going to use our layer groups to do this. As you guys know, when you put layers in a group, you guys have been doing a great job of that with all your files, like grouping them and having associated things together in a layer. It makes it a lot easier to work with. So these 4 frames are now going to serve as the basis for the buttons that we're going to make. We're going to add a label to identify each, and then put a drop shadow and a stroke around them. So make sure your info window is still open. And we're going to go up into our ruler, and we're going to drag down a new horizontal ruler down to 795 pixels. So up in your ruler, click and drag down, and when your little measurement guide says 795, you can let go, or as close to that as you can get. And we're going to zoom in on that first square. So we've now just added this guideline right here, and ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to make a rectangle and fill it with a color so that we can write some text here and have it show up on all of the pictures equally. All right, let's go to our layers panel and look down at the bottom, and one of the changes with 2020 is we no longer have that little sheet of paper with the notched corner that's our new button. We now have a plus that says create new whatever. So that's just a visual difference, but it's actually makes more sense to have it just be a plus. So we're going to click on that, and we got a new layer added. You can see it's right here, layer 2. And we're going to rename it band. We're going to grab our rectangular marquee. So the marching ants way up at the top, rectangular marquee. And we're going to drag across this new little rectangle that we made at the bottom of our picture. So use the guides, and basically it's going to be the width of the picture and about 33 or 34 pixels tall. Then we're going to go up to Edit, Fill, and what it fills with can be anything from the background, foreground, a specific color, it could content aware, all of these different options. We're going to choose color, and then we get our color picker, and we're going to choose a dark blue color. If you want to use the one that the book is using, the RGB coordinates are 25, 72, and 121. Otherwise, we're gonna, whoops, what did I type wrong? 72 and 121. Really should not be thinking that hard to add a little blue piece. Wow. I'm assuming yours filled with blue quite easily. This is really not that hard. I can't. I've tried, or I have a few times. Right. No, I thought that too when I saw it, but no, I have the spinning beach ball of death, which is not a good thing to have. And I have to be patient because the more I click, the more I hurt it and confuse it, so. La, 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 la. I'm not very patient. All right, so we have that filled with blue at long last. All right. Okay. All right, next thing we're going to do is add some text to it. Deselect your marching ants, so Command D to get those to go away. Take your type tool, and up in our upper menu, we're going to choose Myriad Pro. Whoops, got to have your fingers on the right keys to make that work. M-Y-R-I-A-D. Myriad Pro Regular. 18 point. In the next drop down, we're going to choose Strong. Alignment of center and a color of white. And then click in about the visual center of that box since you're centering your type, and type in Gallery 1. And then position it it's not quite right. You can use the arrow keys to nudge it up or down a little bit. And there you have gallery 1. All right, what we now need to do is we need to take in our layers panel the gallery 1 text layer that we just had, and then we're going to shift to select layer 2, which you guys named. I'm going to rename that. It's supposed to be named band. So select gallery 1 and the band, both of those 2 layers. And we're going to group these layers. So under the layer panel or layer drop down menu, we can choose group layers, or Command G is the shortcut. So that's just the blue band and the text put together as a group. All right, we're going to double click on the name group 1 in our layers panel, and we're going to call that gallery 1. Twirl it open, and you can see the 2 items that are inside it. They're kind of pushed over to the right or indented to show that they're part of that group. We have the text and the blue band. The next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that that beach frame, which is the picture that goes with it, is part of that group. So drag that into your gallery 1 so that it becomes nested inside of there, and then rearrange it in the stack order if that was a problem. So in gallery 1, we have the beach picture, the blue band, and the gallery 1. You can twirl that shut, and then we're going to drag gallery 1, this layer, up so it's above the other 4, so that it's gallery 1 first and then these other pictures. And save your file. Brenda mockup recovered. Lovely. Okay, next thing we want to do is duplicate this process. We've designed the label for one button, and we can go through all those steps again, but it's a lot faster just to duplicate that layer group and work with it. In our layers panel, let's make sure that gallery 1 is selected. You know what? I jumped ahead because I know where we're going with this ultimately. Twirl open gallery 1 and take that picture, the beach frame, and we don't want it nested in there anymore, so just drag it down out of that layer group anywhere so that it's not nested in there anymore. All we should have in gallery 1 are the 2 things, the band and the words that say gallery 1. All right, so highlight gallery 1 in the layer group. Switch to the Move tool in your Tools panel and make sure that this Auto Select option up here in the option bar is not checked. When it's checked and you're hovering over something, it's smart enough to know that if you click there, that's probably the thing you want selected, and it grabs it in the layer panel for you. But right now we don't want that feature, so turn that off. We're going to hold down Alt or Option on the Mac, obviously, and we're going to drag that out to make a duplicate of this gallery 1. So with the Move tool, we're going to Option drag, and we're going to plop that on top of our second picture. And we're going to Option drag again until we get all 3 of them with this grouping. So we now have gallery 1 copy. Up here you can see how those are all named. All right, now take your text tool and we're going to edit the text on these. So click on the second picture that says gallery 1 and name it gallery 2. Click on the next one. Gallery 3 and gallery 4. After you've changed all of those, switch back to your Move tool again. And over in our Layers panel, we're going to clean up this mess that we kind of made. We can twirl them shut. Gallery 1 copy, we can rename as Gallery 2. Copy 2 version is actually Gallery 3. And you probably guessed the last one is Gallery 4. All right, now one by one, we are going to put their appropriate picture with them. So if we twirl open Gallery 1, we see that we have the blue band and the words Gallery 1, and we want to get the appropriate picture to go with it, which was that beach picture. So take the beach frame and drag it up into Gallery 1.
How did you duplicate the whole group again? The whole gallery?
That blue band and the words, is that what you're saying? Make sure that the layer group that is those two things is selected in the Layers panel, and then just Option drag on your document. So once you drag the appropriate picture into Gallery 1, you can twirl it shut, and then you can twirl open Gallery 2 and drag the appropriate picture of that one, which is this one. And the stacking order matters. Remember, the picture's got to be underneath that blue band in the text or we won't see it. And then Gallery 3 is the DeYoung picture. And then Gallery 4 is this main 1 picture. Okay, so now it's all cleaned up. Each one of those has its own grouping folder, and inside of it you find the picture, the blue bar, and the words that label the gallery. Save. Next thing we're going to do to add some visual interest to this is we're going to add a drop shadow and a stroke around each one of these buttons. Select the Gallery 1 grouping layer, and we're going to go down to the bottom of our Layers panel and click on the FX button to add an effect. And we're going to choose Drop Shadow. It's going to pull up a window where we can modify the drop shadow, and I can see it over here as it's showing up in my actual layout. Then you can tweak how you want your drop shadow to look. Is it too dark? Is it too offset? Do you want it a little bit closer? Whatever you want to do. We're going to change the opacity of this to 27%, which is just going to make it, more see-through, a little bit lighter. We're going to change the distance to be 9 pixels, the spread to be 19%, and the size to be 18 pixels. Again, the book is telling us these numbers. You would just play around with these numbers to get the effect that you want. You can see it's very subtle. It's just kind of gives it that three-dimensional look, but it doesn't scream, it's high noon and this is weird. Just is very subtle. While we're still in this panel, don't hit OK yet. We're also going to add a stroke. So go over on the left-hand side here and highlight the line that says stroke so that it's checked, it's turned on, and because it's highlighted, we now have the options for the stroke showing up in the middle part. We're going to change, actually the size we're going to leave as 1 pixel, but we're going to position it on the inside of our image, not on the outside of it. And then the color swatch, we're going to click on that color swatch, and then we're going to sample the blue in the bar that we added so we get that same color blue, and say OK to that color blue. And now we're happy with that. We have both the drop shadow and the stroke that we want, and we're going to hit OK. And so help me if I'm stalling out again.
I try and change the layer, sorry, the stroke from outside to inside,
Mm-hmm.
it fills in the entire image.
Is it 1 pixel? Or is it ginorm?
1 pixel inside. I haven't sampled the color yet.
Fill type. Well, I don't know. Click on that down arrow by the color. I'll leave it at color. Pull your slider around for the 1 pixel. See if it's making sense. Okay, it's working. It's just change it to blue. Sample the color blue in there. Ugh. Okay. Say okay, and then let's go look at your layer stack. Text. Where is the bar, the blue bar at the bottom? Oh, the band, okay. Text and the band. Oh, for the love of God, I don't know.
So I applied the drop shadow to all the other ones before I did that. Just go undo that.
All right, what we should have been able to accomplish, and you guys did, was put this cute little drop shadow and stroke around gallery 1. So we see we have this FX associated with it, and obviously the goal is to make it all look the same, so we're going to apply it to all 3 of those that are remaining. We don't necessarily want to have to go through all the work of getting the numbers exactly right and the color and the stroke. So a quick way of doing that is to come over to your layers panel where you see the FX symbol, hold down Option, which is going to make a copy, and drag the FX up to gallery 2, and drag it up to gallery 3, and drag it up to gallery 4. Okay, so Option or Alt, Mac or PC, dragging it up will make a copy of it. It's exactly the same settings, so no guesswork. You didn't have to go and write it all down and make sure it's going to be the same. All right. I'm going to twirl those shut just because they take up a lot of real estate on here. So gallery 3, 4, and 1. It's down here. I don't know what those crazy things are. All right. All right, got those spun shut. The Art button, way at the top of our layers panel, let's twirl that open to expand that. And inside the Art button, we see a navigation frame. If you need to turn on the eyeball for that so that we can see it, it should bring that in here into our frame. I tell you, the voodoo is just pretty profound right now because that's not how it should look. Yours doesn't look that way, does it? You see the whole navigation down here somewhere? Like that? All right. So that is another layer that they have already created and turned on. So this would be the mock-up for the website. This would be where you would hover over this and presumably it would either link to the page or you would get a drop down of even more options. Let's save our file up to this point and close it. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to automate a multi-step task. So there's this thing in Photoshop called actions. How many of you, when you did your text tutorial, that thing up there, had actions involved? Does that ring a bell? Seems like somebody told me that it walked them through making an action. Maybe it was somebody in the online group. So what actions are is it basically is a recorder of what you're doing. And it's not like you have to be fast. It's not timed. It just every time you click or do something in Photoshop, it makes a recording of that. And then when you're done, you hit stop. And then you can go onto a new layer and play that action and it will do all those steps for you. So if you resize an image, put a drop shadow on it, put a stroke around it, and then save it as a PSD, all 4 of those steps would be recorded as an action and you can play it out on another piece in the puzzle and it will do all those steps for you really quickly. This is an awesome thing if you bring in a bunch, say you have 50 pictures you took that day all on your digital camera and you need to bring them down from high res down into low res so you can work with them for the web. You can make an action that says open, resize to 72 pixels, 72 dots per inch, save, and stop that action. And then you can play that action on an entire folder and tell it to save into a new folder. So you'd have your originals and you'd make a new folder called web size. And you play that action and in the blink of an eye, it does all 50 pictures for you. Which is really cool. Really good for workflow too. All right, we're going to start by recording an action that resizes an image, changes the canvas size, adds layer styles, and buttons to match the ones we've already created. So the 4 buttons that we've already made are going to serve as the basis for making these new ones. So let's do a File, Open. Go into the subfolder in Lesson 13 called Buttons, and you can see that we have Gallery 5, 6, 7, and 8. We're going to double click on Gallery 5 to open it. And you can see that it's already made in the case that it's the picture, the blue bar at the bottom, and the words Gallery 5. We're now going to work with actions. So we need to open the window and then actions. So activate the actions panel. And this is what it looks like right here. I'm going to drag mine a little bit bigger so you can see it. The default actions that are here are some that they think you might want to use. A vignette, a frame, a wood frame, molten lead. Some of these are so strange. Molten lead, if we were to twirl that open, here's what it does. It takes a snapshot, it converts it, resets the swatches, makes a layer, fills it with clouds, does levels, curves, yada, yada, yada. It would run all those steps. Let's twirl shut the default actions. We don't need to work with them at all. We're going to make our own action. And at the bottom, we're going to click on the folder icon that says Create a New Set. So click on that, and we're going to name this one Buttons. And now you see that we have a set of an action or something called buttons. All right, within that, we're now going to go down and we're going to create the new action button, which is now a plus sign. It's not the little bent piece of paper like it used to be. And it says, okay, we're going to make a new action. What do you want to call it? We're going to call this Resizing and Styling Images. Resizing, I can't even write. Resizing and styling images. It's going to be housed in the set called buttons that we just made. You can assign function keys to it, so if it's something you're going to use over and over, maybe every time you hit F7 it runs this action. So that's where you could do that. All right, now we're going to hit record. Notice in this panel the little red record light down here is on, and there's a stop button. Again, this is not a timed thing. Don't start freaking out. It's just whatever steps you do take are going to be recorded. You can go back and change your mind, turn them off, do different things, so don't totally freak out. All right, first thing we're going to do is resize and sharpen this image. Let's go image size to get this window up. Currently, this is a 6" by 6" 72 dot per inch. This is pretty darn big for a button. Make sure that resample is checked. That gives Photoshop permission to throw away pixels when we make it smaller. And we're going to change our measurement from inches into pixels. Okay, so right now this is 477 pixels. We want this to match our other buttons, and they were 180. So now it takes it down to 180 by 180 at 72 dots per inch, and that's what we want. And say OK. So that was the first step. Notice it happened on our screen. It got a lot smaller. Have we done any sharpening to make low resolution pictures look better? I can't remember if we talked about that early on. Okay, so when you throw away pixels, when you downsize images, they tend to look a little soft. Let's just view this, whoops, at real size. It's too small, a little bit bigger. What we want to do now is sharpen it. So we're going to go up to the filter menu and we're going to choose sharpen, and then we're going to choose the smart sharpen option. And in this box, we can change some of the presets and the amount of sharpening we do. So basically, we're trying to make the edges a little bit more crisp so it doesn't look icky and blurry. The amount that we're going to sharpen to is 100%. So either type that in or move your slider. And the radius, how far out it's going to reach, is just going to be 1 pixel. And when we say OK, it's going to yell at us. It's going to say, well, it did it. I'll be darned. It's the next step where it yells at us because we're working on a background layer that's locked. So the next steps that we want to do, we need to convert this to a regular layer first. So over in our layer panel, we're going to either just double click on the background layer and it's going to say, OK, what do you want to name this? It's going to be a regular layer. And we're going to call it button and say OK. Now when we look at our layer panel, it's no longer a locked background layer. It's a regular layer that we can do things to. Canvas size. We're going to make a blank canvas behind this so that we can add that drop shadow, and that's part of our overall graphic. If we didn't add to the canvas size, the drop shadow has nowhere to go. It wouldn't work here. So under Image, Canvas Size, we're going to set it to pixels so that we're speaking the same language. And we're going to change the width. We're not going to do relative, so uncheck the relative box. We want to actually see the pixel measurements. Right now it's 180. We want to do 220 by 220. And the proxy should be in the center, meaning that this is added equally to the left, right, top, and bottom. So make sure that that center square is the one that's anchored down and say OK. Now we have a transparent background. Our canvas is bigger, so when we add our styles, the drop shadow, it's going to work here. Go up to your layer menu. It's another way of going about this, and we're going to choose layer style and drop shadow. We did that previously using the FX button. This is the same thing. And this is our option that shows up. We're going to do opacity of 27%. The angle, we're going to change this. So this is where the lighting is coming from. We're going to change it to 120. And the other numbers are going to be 9, 19, and 18, if they aren't already set to that. Before we leave here, we're going to go to the stroke option, highlight that, and we're going to give it the 1 point or 1 pixel inside stroke in blue color. And then say OK, and that's going to apply both of them to our graphic. Then we're going to do a file, save as. I would save this to your desktop right now, not to the cloud. And the only thing you want to do is make sure that the format is set to be Photoshop, PSD. So this original image is a JPEG. When it makes these changes, it's going to save it as a PSD. And then say OK to that. And then we're going to close the file. So we do File, Close, or Command W. So that tells the action to do that. Now we need to stop recording our action because those are the steps that we want. So over in our action panel, if you can't see that for some reason, go Window Actions. We need to now hit the stop button, which is the square. Okay, so there's our action called resizing and stylizing. Changes the image size, it sharpens it. We set a bigger background, or no, we release it from being a locked background to being a regular layer. We change our canvas size. We added some styles, we saved it, and we closed it. So the action we recorded is ready to go. Now we can apply this as a batch. Let's go to File, Open, and navigate to the Lesson 13 Buttons folder, and we see that we have those original 4 JPEGs plus the PSD that we just created. And we're going to Command Select so that we get all 3 of them, Gallery 6, 7, and 8, and then say Open. So either hold Shift or Command, however you want to highlight them. They're in a row, so it'll work fine. And say Open. Whoops. Six, 7, and 8. Not 5. We've already done 5. 6, 7, 8, and then open them. So what we're doing is opening the files in Photoshop, and now we're going to batch process them. That's one way of doing it. You don't necessarily even have to open them in Photoshop, though. You could just navigate to the folder and run the batch automation on the folder itself without opening them first. This demo walks us through opening them first. All right, now we're going to do File, Automate, which is down towards the bottom. And here's some of the things that can be automated. We're going to do this batch right now, but you can see that you can do a PDF presentation, you can make contact sheets, which is kind of like what you did with the filter gallery that you made. So automate batch, and we get our window, and it says, okay, what do you want to do here? All right, the set that we're working from is the set that we called buttons, and the action is resizing and styling. If you wanted to run something else, like a default molten lead, you would change them right here. But in fact, the one that we want is the one that we created called buttons resizing. All right, in the source, we're not going to a folder. This is where you could if you wanted to. So we're gonna click that and we're gonna say, what's the source? What do you wanna do this to? Our open files. So we're changing it to that. In our destination, we're going to choose none, meaning they're just gonna go where they are right now. But this is where you could ultimately have a new folder made that says web optimized images, and you could say I want them to go in that folder when we're done. So you can take them from one folder into another folder just by changing these options here. Destination none, and then we're going to say okay. And you might have saw some flashing. It went really fast. If you don't believe me, come down to your Finder, or actually let's just do a File Open in Photoshop. And in our buttons folder, we now have Gallery 6, 7, and 8 PSD that were made faster than you probably blinked. Correct? Did you guys see a flash go by once? If you're doing this to like 50 images in a folder and outputting them to another folder, you'll see the image open, like it flashes by you so fast and then it goes away and the next one comes up and it goes away. It's really quite cool. So we just ran that action on those JPEGs and turned them into PSDs. I'm going to cancel that. I just wanted to show you that it actually worked. All right. All right, the 4 additional buttons that we made are ready to be placed into our design. It already has that blue band and the gallery name. We don't need to do that. So let's go back to that file that we were working on earlier. I think you guys called it Your Name Mockup. this one. And I'm going to zoom in. Whoops. We're ultimately going to be putting these buttons down here. All right, let's go over to our layers panel and select the layer group called logo layer. So by selecting that layer first, the files that we are about to place are not added inside of any other layer group. They wouldn't jump into any one of these other galleries on accident, which is helpful. And any new layer that we make now is going to be added above here. So, let's make a new layer. So come down to your plus sign at the bottom, click on new layer. It now says layer 2. And we're going to do File, Place Embedded. So we're going to come back up to our menu items here. File, Place Embedded. We're going to be placing these as smart objects because they're embedded. The entire object is going to be copied into our new Photoshop file. So we're going to place the Gallery 5 PSD. Say Place. Notice it gets plopped right in the center. So with our Move tool, we're going to just move this down and use the guides that we have created here to snap it in where we want it. If you need to use your arrow keys to get it precisely to snap, if it's not doing it on its own, go ahead and use your arrow keys. Then when it's where you want it, hit Enter or click outside the image. And we're going to keep doing that. So that was Gallery 5. We're going to do File. Let's add a new layer before we go on. Click on the plus sign to make a new layer and then do File, Place Embedded. And do Gallery 6 PSD, not the JPEG. Move it where you want it. Add a new layer for 7 and for 8. So just keep going through that. Do a File, Place Embedded, Gallery 7. And then add one last layer and place that last one. There you have a nice mock-up of a website. It has some navigation up here, but it also has quick links to 8 different galleries. Let's do a File, Save. And the next step that we're going to talk about, you can close the Actions window that's floating open. The next step that we're going to talk about is the artboard. So I mentioned that this is a layout for a desktop, how it would look on a big computer screen. But we also know that in responsive design, we want it to look differently on a smaller screen, on an iPhone, for example. So we're going to use artboards, and they're going to look just a smidge different in Photoshop as they do in Illustrator, but actually not a lot. All right, let's go up to... File and save your work. We're going to do a File, Open. We're going to navigate to up a folder in Lesson 13. And there is an option called 13 Museo PSD. That's the one that we want to open. Okay. This looks like perhaps another page, an internal page in this website. We can still see it has the same header up here. It still has the navigation and a big image, and then it has some other graphics. Now on a wide screen, this looks great, but on your phone, if this didn't go into responsive design and shift from 2 columns into 1 column, it's going to be really hard to work with. All right, let's do a file, save as, and let's call this one Your Name Museo. And click Save. And then we want to select all of the layers at once. And the fastest way is to come up to your Select menu and say All Layers, which is not the first option, but the second one down. Notice all of them are highlighted over in our Layers panel. The background itself is not, that white background, however. Then in the Layer panel, we're going to say Layer, New, and then we have Artboard. Artboard from Layers. There's 2 options here. We want to say Artboard from the layers that we have selected. And it gives you a chance to name it, and we're going to call this one Desktop. So this is what a desktop mockup would look like. And you guys, if you're not zoomed out, back up a little bit, you should now see the word desktop up here, meaning this is an artboard and it's labeled it for you. So that's a little bit different behavior. All right. Window, workspace. I got to go back to the Essentials workspace once again. And the Artboard tool was down here. Where did you go? It's grouped with the Move tool. Thank you for the help. So under the Move tool, we'll find your Artboard tool. I'm looking down here because that's where it lives in Illustrator. Sometimes I wish they would make things similar. At least the toolbar would be nice. So your Artboard is up here stacked with your Move tool. And we're going to Option click on this button to the right of our existing artboard. You guys see the little plus sign right over here? Hold down Option and click on it, and that adds a copy of that exact same artboard. Over in your Layers panel, we have a layer called Desktop, which is an artboard, and we have one called Desktop Copy. Double click on that name, and we're going to rename it iPhone. And then in our Properties panel, there's an option that says Set the Artboard to a preset, and we're going to click on the down arrow here, and we're going to look at all these different presets that they have for us. So we're going to do this for an iPhone 6. So it's the 3rd option down. It says iPhone 8, 7, and 6. Evidently they have the same dimensions. We're going to choose that. And notice it made our artboard smaller and taller. It cut off some things on the right and it gave us some more room on the left. So we have 2 different artboards, desktop and iPhone. Click Save right now. And again, this is something that we're going to be giving to a web developer to make a custom site for us, to make it look exactly how we're showing them on these mockups. All right, in our Layers panel, let's click to expand the iPhone layer so that we're working on that one. And we're going to select the first and the last layers in this artboard only. So in the iPhone, we're going to select from the button layer all the way down, hold Shift all the way down to layer 0, and that's going to highlight all of those different layers for us. We're not selecting the name iPhone itself. Now what we want to do is transform this, free transform. So Command T is the shortcut for that, and we see our bounding box over what was there, and we want to kind of shrink it down, but we're going to do a few things in our option bar first. Up in our option bar, the toggle reference point. This bad boy should light up. Oh, for crying out loud. Does that work for you guys? Because it did for me before. It's not working? You can't click on that? Oh, that's because I'm clicking on the wrong damn thing. It is the next icon over that actually looks like the reference point marker. If you click the checkbox in front of it, it lights up. We're going to lock down the top left square. So right now the middle anchor point was the one selected. We're going to lock it down to the top left square. We want to make sure that our maintain aspect ratio is selected so that everything is locked down here. And we're going to change the width on this one from 100%. We're going to change it to 726px. So we're going to tell it a specific pixel option. That's the height. It's too bad I don't pay attention to what I'm telling you guys. It's the width that's 726. And then hit return or the check mark to apply the settings. We're going to position our cursor inside of this bounding box, and then we're going to shift drag it down into our artboard. Shift is just going to hold it centered at that top left point. We're going to bring it down into here. And we're going to position it so that our Museo art, that top part, is kind of positioned similar to it is in the desktop. So we're not bringing it all the way down. We're going to let some of that white space stay off of our artboard. So bring it down a little bit so it looks like this. Hit enter or select to exit that free transform mode. And then we're going to deselect all of our layers over here in the layers panel. So in our select drop down, we're going to say deselect layers. It's going to unhighlight all of them in our layers panel. We're then going to just pick the logo layer. So select that in your layer panel, and we're going to free transform that one. And we're going to make it a specific width, or if you wanted to just drag on it, you can do that as well. So had we left a little bit more white space up there, we could have made this bigger and had it span all the way out like this. Now you can see mine's kind of cut off at the top here, so I would want to select all the layers and bump them down again. Make sure I can get that whole logo on my artboard. Remember, the artboard or your image size is what actually prints. So you want to make sure that everything is showing up here. All right, in your layers panel, we're going to select the banner art layer, the left column, and the right column layer. So shift select those three things. And then we're going to hold down shift and we're going to move those around on our artboard. Just so that the navigation is kind of positioned how it is in our desktop version. So pull it down just a little smidge there. All right, what we still have going on here that's not great though is that we have a 2-column layout. It fits on our iPhone now, but this is going to be super small and that's not really what we want. So we want to make each column fill the width of the artboard. And we're going to have to make our artboard taller to accommodate that because we're going to have this left column fill this whole span, and then this right column we're going to bring down below and have it fill as well. Select the iPhone artboard in your layers panel. And then with our artboard tool, which again is nested under the move tool, we're going to drag down the bottom handle to make it taller. So pick that bottom bounding box and drag down and make it taller. All right, go back to your layer panel and choose the right column. That automatically jumps you back to the move tool. You're out of the artboard tool and back to the move tool. With the right column selected, we're going to edit free transform, Command T. We have to look at our references again up here in our option bar before we move on. We want to make sure that the reference point is selected in the top right square. So lock down the top right square this time. And make sure that the aspect ratio is selected, and we're going to enter a 672 for width. And that made that piece a lot wider than it was. Position your cursor inside here and drag it down on the artboard. So that took that right column and made it a lot wider. Then we're going to select the left column over in our layers panel. We're going to anchor down the top left square once we do that. Free transform, Command T. We're going to anchor down our top left square in the reference point. And we're going to tell this width also to be 672 pixels. And we hit enter. And it's positioned where you want it, hit enter again. So what I see is that I didn't make my artboard deep enough to start with. So I would have to go back and take my artboard tool and select the iPhone artboard, and I need to drag this down even more. And then I need to position what was the right column down a little bit farther in my mock-up. So that's how you would expect it to behave on an iPhone. You would expect it to go to single column and for the graphics to fill this. So if you look at all of your fit in the screen, we have our desktop mockup right here on the left, and we have our iPhone 6 mockup on the right hand side. Let's just do a file save. The last couple of things in this chapter are just exporting this. So right now it's a Photoshop document, it's a PSD, and you probably want to give this to your web developer in something they can work with. And if they don't own Photoshop, they can't open a PSD file, right? They would prefer a JPEG or a PNG or something like that. So we're going to export these entire artboards as JPEGs so that we can hand them off to our web developers. So up in the File menu, we're going to choose File, and then Export, and then you see you have quite a few options over here in the Export flyout. We are going to choose Export As, because this is going to export each artboard as a whole unit. So Export As, pick that option. Please don't stall out on me. Okay, on the list on the left-hand side, you can see that Select All. They're both going to be exported. We're going to click on the iPhone artboard, so make sure that that's the one that's highlighted. And you can see that it's planning on making a PNG, a PNG at these dimensions. We're going to go over to the right-hand side here, and we're going to change those settings. Also, in the Scale All section over here on the left-hand side, we're going to keep it at 1, which means exact size. You can see that you can make it twice as big, 3 times as big, half as small, a third as small, whatever. We're going to leave our size as 1x, but over on the right-hand side, we want to give them a JPEG. So we're going to choose JPEG from the drop-down menu. And then it doesn't have to be a huge file. We're going to back it off to 80% quality, which is just going to make the file size a little bit smaller, but still good. And in the color space down here, which is much further down on the right-hand side, we want to have it checked Convert to sRGB. That's the color space of screens and monitors and phones, iPads, all that stuff. The other settings can be left as they are, but before we move on, let's go over to the left-hand side and choose our desktop. Highlight that one. That one is also being output as a PNG. We don't want that. We want a JPEG at 80% quality as well. And we're keeping it at 100% or a 1x scale, that's fine. But if you wanted to change image sizes, you could do that here as well. And when you're happy with that, you can see that you're about to make a JPEG of the iPhone and a JPEG of the desktop. You click on the export button down at the bottom, and it asks where you want to put this. We're going to go to our lesson 13 folder, and we're going to go into assets. We're going to twirl that open. And then we're going to say, yes, this is where we want it to go, into the assets folder. So we say open, and that sets that up, and it just ran that process and it saved those two things. If you don't believe it, trust it, you want to see for yourself, do a file open. And in lesson 13, in your assets folder, you have a desktop JPEG and an iPhone JPEG, two JPEGs that you can send and share with your developer now. Cancel out of that. What about if we just want some assets? We want to take maybe just one item from here, maybe the header, we want to export that, or just a picture, or just a button. That's another thing you can do. So if your client likes this, they're happy with what you have laid out, we can also use export as to create assets of each layer on the artboard. So in our layers panel, let's twirl shut the iPhone and twirl open the desktop, and we're going to select all of the layers within the desktop. So start with button art, hold down shift, and select that last layer to select all of those in the desktop. Now we need to do this from the layers panel menu. We're not going back up to file export. We're going to stay right over here in our layers panel, and we're going to click on the menu in the layers panel, these three lines at the top right. And from here, we are going to choose export as. So now it knows we're exporting the layers. We're not doing the whole artboard like we did previously. So export as, and look how smart it is. It knows that all these layers are different things. So it's going to give you your navigation button art, the logo at the top of the page. Notice it's using the names that we gave it in our layers panel. So this is why naming is smart. If it was just layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, it would be a pain. But we have all of these different things ready to go. All right. Same settings that we did previously. So we're going to keep it at 1x size, which is the exact size it is. But over here on the right, we want to do 80% quality JPEGs. So they're not quite as big. And make sure that convert to sRGB is still on. And we're going to click the export button. And this time we want to put it in a folder that's set up for the desktop assets. So navigate back to lesson 13. You want to twirl these shut so you don't have so much going on. They've created a folder for you called Assets for the Desktop. Click on that folder. That's where we want to send these, and say open so it knows what folder it's going to. And it's done. We want to make sure of that. We can try to open that folder. Assets on the desktop, here they are. Here's 5 different JPEGs, all at 80% quality. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to do that same thing for the iPhone version. So twirl shut your desktop assets. Actually, let's deselect all those layers. So under select, deselect layers, we don't want to have any of those active. Go into your iPhone, twirl that open, and choose all of those layers in the iPhone layer. From within the layer panel, choose the menu at the top right and export as. I'm going to save these at 1x size, but we're going to make them 80% JPEGs. Click export, and now we want to navigate to the folder that's ready for those, which is called Assets iPhone. And export into those. And again, to make sure that things work the way you thought they did, you can do a file open. And you can see that in the iPhone's asset folder, we have our JPEGs, and in the desktop assets folder, we have our JPEGs. So these are things that we could give to our web developer to help them understand if they want to place individual assets.